Hey folks, it's Chris Dyer with the Martial Alchemy channel, and we are coming at you with another What Is video. Today we're covering Monomachia, something that's very near and dear to my heart. Let's take a look at it. All right, so what in the world is Monomachia? Most of you probably have never heard of this, and Monomachia is a combination of two words, monos meaning alone, and machia as battle. So ritualized single combat, specifically from the Bronze Age of the ancient world. So what in the world are we talking about? Well, is this an actual martial art? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is. It's something that you can go out and study now. And there's a lot of work being done on understanding the weapons and armor of Bronze Age, mostly the Aegean world. So we're talking what is now Greece. So think about Trojan War era weapons and armor and what the combat of that age would have actually looked like. There's a lot of historical work being done and a lot of historical reconstruction, meaning people putting on weapons and armor and whatnot of the age, trying to see how this stuff actually was done. And there's actually a really great manual out there called Monomachia, Dueling in Ancient Greece by yours truly, this guy. I wrote the manual on how single combat was done in Bronze Age Greece, and you guys can go online right now and buy yourself a copy if you're interested. But let's talk about some of the history and some of the key features of Monomachia and what it actually looks like. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the history as we usually do. So most people are very familiar with what we would call the classical or archaic periods in ancient Greece. So this is, think hoplites, lines of combatants, rows of soldiers and whatnot, all marching towards, say, fighting with the Persians, for example. We have this image of what the ancient Greeks and whatnot were like, and very few people actually study the Bronze Age era, which we know to be more accurate to, say, Trojan War or the Odyssey. And this is kind of what the Monomachia, the Bronze Age dueling, is focused on. And the reason for that is, if you go to classical or archaic periods, we know that the phalanx, or the lines of combat, were way more common. So you would have either ship battles, so this would be battles at sea on board ship, or you'd have people massed in rows of soldiers, and they'd march towards another enemy, and they would meet, and then they would do the conflict there, and then they'd separate. And the concept of stepping out of your line. So let's talk about Spartans for a second. Think about rows and rows of soldiers. If you were to back up or move forward and break that line of combat, that would be a very terrible thing, because you're supposed to cover your partners in the shield, in the shadow of your shield. So your shield is not only to protect you, but it's to protect the person next to you. If you break this formation, you've ruined the entire structure, and your entire line is going to collapse because of this. In the ancient world, that was not the case. And we know historically that there would have been things like duels, that instead of having rows and rows of combatants, it was much more guerrilla style, hit and run, raids and whatnot, individual fighters. And we're going to look at some of the details of this in just a little bit, but we know from this time period, so we're talking mid-12th century BC. So we know in the Mycenaean era of Greece that they would have been much more individualized, ritualistic, single combat. And we're going to talk about some of how this works in just a little bit, like I said. But what were we going for as far as the historical resources? Well, I've already mentioned the two biggies, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, a lot of people from high school are probably familiar with Homer and his stories, and you've always heard that there was this dark age of Greece, and there was this 500-year period between the earliest sources that we have as far as the archaeological record, and when the story of the Iliad and Odyssey was written down by the supposed Homer. And the story was kind of made up based on the historical figures, the mythological figures, the heroes of the past. And what we're now finding, and there's more and more research being done on this, that this 500-year gap is actually, or some people are arguing, and I'm in this camp, that that 500 years of the Dark Age Greece never existed, that it was a calculation error based on Egyptian time frames. And so if you get rid of that time period, that gap, that 500 years of missed history doesn't actually exist. It was much more of a blend, a smoother blend, and it's possible that the storyteller that we know as Homer was much closer to the actual events. That being said, even if he wasn't, he's incredibly accurate when it comes to weapons and armor and the fighting methods of the age. So we use Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey as kind of the reference points. And in fact, in Monomachia, Dueling in Ancient Greece, the basis of the book is each and every single duel in the Iliad and how it is played out. So I've done those all in detail. So if you wanted to have like a resource on what the fights actually look like, that's a great way to go to. All right, so taking what we have from the Iliad and the Odyssey and then getting my hands on. So I was lucky enough to work with Matt Amp, a good friend who does amazing museum quality reproductions of Bronze Age weapons and armor, and getting to handle that stuff, put it on, see what it's felt like to move around. You see some of the openings and whatnot, and we start coming up with a very, very clear view of how combat would have been done. So me as a martial artist getting to handle this stuff, hold the weapons and whatnot, really made a clear view on how combat would have been done in the age. All right, so that's a lot of talk about the historical references that we make in Monomachia. Now let's look at some of the commonalities in these duels that we see. Okay, so let's talk about the commonalities in these duels. So it is very ritualistic in 2 points. One, oftentimes the duel is going to call upon the deities, that they're going to ask for divine favor or have, call upon the divinities to witness the combat. That the gods, at least in the Iliad and the Odyssey, are favoring different heroes, and we're bringing that divinity into the combat itself, which actually scholars have made the argument that this makes it even more accurate to the historical age. That we know that historical record from the ancient world, anytime that you call upon the divinity, it actually makes it more of a historical thing. If it didn't, it would be strange of the time period. All right, so that's the first part. And the second part is that there's a structure to the way that this is done, making it very, very official, and that both parties would understand the process, so that you couldn't say, oh, you won because you broke the process. That's not how it works. That if both people are playing by the same rules, it's very clear who the winner and who the loser is. If one person breaks the ritual, then we're back to battle and all hell breaks loose. That's in fact what happens several times in the Iliad, as we see in the text. All right, so the first part of this is the call out. So this is where hero one will call out another person. They'll say, my name is, I'm the son of, and they'll go through a lineage, usually back to some divinity and whatnot. And they'll call out the other person. We'll get a list of their names, their lineage and whatnot. And this does two things. It makes it very clear who the combatants are. We're not going to change it up in midway, right? I'm calling you out. You're calling me out. We're going to go meet. And then this also is our opportunity to develop what's called kelos, or our glory. So this is the glory that's our name after we die, that's passed on through the ages. And if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey as a historic piece, we are in fact living up to, or building up that kelos, that glory of these heroes. So we've all heard of Hector and Achilles and Paris and all these. That's Kelos, the glory, the name that lives on after your death. So we know who this person is, and when they go to compete and when they go to battle, they're going to be remembered because of this. So that's a very, very important part of this ritual. Okay, the next part of this is who gets to do this calling out. This is actually a really interesting social part of this, is it's always a named person or a high person, that it's never a commoner. Commoners don't get to do this. There's two reasons for this, again. One, the focus of these texts is for the higher class. So we've talked about this a lot in our videos, that there's very much a class structure. The ones that are being told in the stories are the higher class people, and we don't want them competing against the lower class person. That just wouldn't happen. Second of all, they're the people with weapons and armor that can actually do it. lower class people are slingers, so they use sling stones, they use arrows, they use ranged weapons. The higher ranking people in the military, the ones that can afford the weapons and armor, they're the ones that go and compete. And the reason for this is the next part. After the call out is the deal. I'm going to fight you. If you win, you get my bronze breastplate, my helmet, my greaves, you get my spear, this sword that was passed down from, however many generations, you get these things, but return my body. In the same vein, if you die, if I conquer you, I get your helmet that's been passed down for 6th generation, that fine breastplate that you're wearing, those fancy greaves, those neat shoes you're wearing, those are mine, but I'll return your body. This is part of the contract. This is part of the deal, the ritual. If you break this, the entire structure, the entire thing falls apart. We in fact see this in Hector versus Achilles. Achilles doesn't honor this part of the deal, and all hell breaks loose on the battlefield afterwards. The next part is the casting of lots and spears. So casting lots and spears is sometimes, not always, if we're in a pitched battle and two named people square off with each other, you'll actually see this. The crowd, the common people will actually separate. This actually reminds me a lot of high school, where you'd see two people get into a fight and everybody would circle around them. Things haven't changed much, right? So the two combatants, if they're on a pitched battle, so both sides going at each other and two main heroes square off, everybody will stop to watch this. So that there's no casting of lots now, but there is a casting of spears. So what I mean by casting lots and casting of spears is sometimes, if we are calling people out, so we see this in Menelaus versus Paris, for example, they'll actually put their name in a stone, put the stones in a helm, shake the helm, whichever one pops out first, oh, you get to throw the first spear. And that leads us to the next part of this is who gets to go first. So how this works is two combatants either side of a field. You need to close this gap. So the very first thing, if we were to do step 1, throw spear, right? So the imagery that we see is often of a person with a shield, 2 spears. And a quick note on the spears of this age, they're much shorter than we would see in something like the Hellenistic age, which, 16-foot long spears and whatnot. We don't see that in this age. They're much shorter, usually because we're traveling by boat to get to wherever we're going. We're part of a raid, so carrying a 16-foot spear is much more challenging than carrying a light, 6-foot spear or whatever. And there doesn't seem to be the distinction that you see in later age of throwing spear, javelin, versus a fighting spear, what we call a spear. So they're both about the same length. You don't necessarily see a longer or shorter spear. Okay, so you have 2 spears. You face your opponent and you take aim. You throw your first spear. The goal for this is to pierce your partner or your opponent's shield so that it becomes unusable. We know that the spears in the Roman armies, for example, were designed specifically to do this. They'd go in, they'd bend, you can't use your shield anymore. Same idea. If I can get my spear to pierce your shield, maybe it pierces you, maybe not, but your shield at that point is no longer usable. So that's the first goal. If it doesn't pierce the shield, all right, you now have your second spear. The spear of the age was the king of weapons. That was the best weapon you could use. You have your reach and you have your defense and your shield. So you have your shield in one arm, and now we're fighting for spear position. So we're trying to stab each other. What you're shooting for is gaps in the armor. So one thing I always tell people is you can tell how old or when your martial art was created by the targets that your forms and your techniques often go for. If your forms go for eyes, throat, groin, in the armpits and whatnot, if you have a lot of strikes like that in your martial art, you know that it's a very old style that comes from when people fought in armor. For this reason, those are the gaps in the armor. So you're shooting for the mouth is a common target, the eyes, the neck, under the armpits, groin, and thighs. So that's what you're trying to spear because everything else is covered by armor and covered by shield. If, for whatever reason, your shield or your spear snaps, it breaks, the spearhead falls off, you lose your spear, you try and throw it, maybe the person backs up and you chuck it at them, you lose that, then you finally resort to your sword. Not everybody had a sword. Axes were fairly common. And then if everything else fell apart, it came down to using stones oftentimes. This is actually really, really common, is pick up stone, shot put in discus. There's a reason that they've been around for a very, very long time. You take stone, you load it up, you got your shield covered. You can smash through a shield. You can collapse structure. You can come and pounce down on top of a person then, or you can hurl it like a discus. You can use these things as ranged weapons. And then finally, grabbing on and just wrestling, grappling. There wasn't a lot of punching and kicking, even though we know that boxing was very common on the age, but wrestling definitely, because if you've got weapons and armor and whatnot, you're grappling, you're trying to lock people up. Another great example, the Menelaus versus Paris, ripping the helmet, using the strap to choke your opponent out. Great example. All right, so I hope you guys enjoy that. This is very, very interesting and fun topic for me, something that I've always been interested in. If you want to know more about Monomachia, I'd be happy to answer all of your questions. There's a lot of people out there. I know I recently saw an article, the Greek government is now funding research to be done on this. They have reproduction of weapons and armor, and they have the Greek soldiers actually on treadmills wearing the armor and whatnot to see how hard it is to move in these stuff. There's some really, really cool research being done on this stuff. So I hope it becomes more and more popular. I know with the movie, the Odyssey coming out, more people are going to be interested in this type of stuff. So if this is something that interests you, be sure to check out my book. There's lots of resources out there. And again, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope to see you next time.